Doug Hansen was a postal worker from America. He was born on the 28th of May 1949 in Seattle, Washington. He grew up in Aberdeen, South Dakota, and moved to Renton, Washington as a teenager with his family. Hansen learned to climb by climbing Mount Rainier in the 1980s. He graduated from Renton High School in 1967 and had worked for the post office since then. He loved spending time outdoors, river rafting and scuba diving. He was somebody that made friends with everybody. He was an outgoing person and everybody liked him. Hansen had been divorced for 17 years. He had been involved with several women, but each of whom eventually left him after growing tired of competing with the mountain for his attention. He had two grown kids, Angie Hansen, 19, and Jamie Hansen, 23, whom he had raised as a single father. Even from a young age, Hansen dreamed of conquering Mount Everest, the highest mountain in the world. Living near Mount Rainier could have possibly inspired him to climb Mount Everest. As he grew up, he was more than determined to scale Everest. To achieve his goal of climbing Mount Everest, he joined an expedition in 1995 led by Rob Hall, a skilled climber from New Zealand who ran adventure consultants. Unfortunately, due to bad weather, Hall turned him around on the south summit at 2:30 p.m. To be denied so close to the summit was a crushing disappointment to Hansen. Hansen couldn't think of a second attempt as the fee to ascend Everest under Hall's supervision was too much. But as Hall was fond of Hansen, he offered a significant discount in fees to climb again in 1996. A few weeks before leaving for Everest in 1996, Hansen had met Karen Mary while visiting a friend in Tucson, Arizona, and they had fallen in love. Hansen was hopeful that she might be a keeper. She wanted to move to the Seattle area. Hansen wanted to better make the summit and get Everest out of his system before she changes her mind. Hansen returned to Everest in 1996 mainly as a result of Hall's advocacy. Hansen had paid for the trip by working the night shift and doing construction jobs by day. In addition, the students of Sunrise Elementary School in Kent, Washington, had sold T-shirts to help fund his climb. Besides, Rob had significantly discounted Hansen's fee for his second attempt. By 1996, Hall was charging $65,000 a head to guide clients to the top of the world. By any measure, this was a lot of money. Hall's adventure consultant team consisted of 8 paying clients and 3 guides. The expedition was populated mostly by wealthy lawyers, doctors, and executives, as the healthy price per head of $65,000 would indicate. Hall called Hansen from New Zealand, urging him to give Everest another shot. And this time Hansen was determined to break the tough. Hansen told John Krakauer that he wants to get this thing done and out of his life. A few weeks before departing for Nepal to start his second Everest attempt, Hansen had undergone minor throat surgery and was feeling severe after effects from it. When John Krakauer attempted to rouse him out of his sleeping bag at Camp 2 on the 26th of April, 2 weeks before the final ascent, Hansen complained, "I feel like shit. I think something's wrong with my throat. Man, I'm getting too old for this stuff." On that same day, Hansen also discovered frostbite forming on his toes, parts of which he had lost during the 1995 trip. The wind was blowing quite hard when Hall's team was crawled into Camp 4 atop the South Col on May 9. It was cold. Doug Hansen, Lou Kasiski, Andy Harris, and Beck Withers laid under the tent in their sleeping bags. listening to the wind howl. Then about 10 p.m. that night, the gale quite suddenly blew itself out. Of a fact, though frigid calm came over the death zone. Hansen had been sick and wasn't climbing well. He looked like he had been woke over with an ice axe. He had not eaten or slept for a few days. On the night of May 10, Hall's group started out first from the South Col. The Mountain Madness climbers and the Taiwanese were about an hour behind them. It was a beautiful night as they began to move across the flat expanse of the South Col leading to the summit face. The wind was absolutely still. The temperature was about -10 degrees Celsius. As the climbers from 3 different expeditions attempted to reach the summit, they quickly encountered a series of problems and delays. Upon reaching the Hellry Stiff, the climbers found that no fixed ropes had been placed as they were supposed to be because Lapsing Jangbo didn't show up to help Ang Dorje install the ropes. Lapsing was short roping Sandy Hill fitmen far below on the slope. This held everyone up for 1 or 2 hours. Things began to go seriously wrong. With a large number of climbers on the move at the same time, there were bottlenecks at the single fix line at the Hellry Stiff. As crucial time spent on laying new roofs, the tight scheduling for the climb began to slip. Many of the climbers had not yet reached the summit by 2 p.m. Hansen didn't appear to be in good physical condition. He moved out of the line and began to descend, saying to Lukashevsky that he was cold and feeling bad and heading down. Rob talked to him and he got back in line and continued the ascent. Hansen was probably also inspired by the school children of Kent, Washington, who had given him a small flag to plant at the summit. Andy Harris reached the summit around 1:12 p.m. Anatoly Bukriyev was already on the summit waiting for clients. Neil Bidelman and Martin Adams arrived at the top at 1:20 p.m. Around the same time, Harris and John Krakauer started their descent. Rob Hall, Mike Groom, and Yasuku Namba reached the summit around 2:10 p.m. In Hall radioed Helen Welton at base camp to give her the good news. A while later, Mike Groom and Yasuku Namba began their descent while Rob was waiting for Doug Hansen to arrive as the weather was turning bad. At 3 p.m., with clients still climbing far below, Hall Sardar, Ang Dorje and other climbing Sherpas who had been waiting at the top began their descent from the summit. On the way down, Ang Dorje came across Doug Hansen above the Hellry Stiff. Dorje ordered him to descend, but he refused. Scott Fisher reached the summit at around 3:40 p.m. on the afternoon of May 10. His Sardar, Lapsing Jangbo Sherpa, was waiting for him at the top. Around this time, Makalu Gao and 2 Sherpas of the Taiwanese team arrived at the summit. Fisher wasn't feeling well. About 3:55 p.m., he started his descent. Shortly after Fisher left the summit, Gao and his Sherpas departed as well, and finally Lapsing headed down, leaving Hall alone on the summit awaiting Doug Hansen. About 4 p.m., Hansen at last appeared, toughing it out, moving painfully slowly over the last bump on the ridge. As soon as Rob saw him, he hurried down to meet him. Hall placed Hansen's arm around his neck and helped him up the final 40 feet to the summit. Both stayed only a minute or two at the summit and then turned to begin their long descent. Hall's mandatory turnaround time had come and gone a full 2 hours earlier. Many of Hall's colleagues have expressed puzzlement at his uncharacteristic lapse of judgment. They wondered, why didn't he turn Hansen around much lower on the mountain, as soon as it became obvious that he was running late? It doesn't seem far-fetched to speculate that because Hall had talked Hansen into coming back to Everest, it would have been especially hard for him to deny Hansen the summit a second time. 100 meters down the summit, Hansen ran out of supplemental oxygen and found it. Dog Hansen had expended every last bit of his strength to reach the summit. Now there was nothing left in reserves to make it back to Camp 4. Pretty much the same thing happened to Hansen in 1995. He was fine during the ascent, but as soon as he started the descent, he lost it mentally and physically. He turned into a zombie, like he had used everything up. At 4:30 p.m., Hall got on the radio to say that he and Hansen were in trouble high on the summit ridge and urgently needed oxygen. 2 full bottles waiting for them at the south summit. If Hall had known this, he could have retrieved the gas fairly quickly and then climbed back up to give Hansen a fresh tank. But Andy Harris, still at the oxygen cache and the throes of his hypoxic dementia, overheard these radio calls and broke in to tell Hall incorrectly, just as he had told my groom and Krakauer earlier, that all the bottles at the south summits were empty. Groom heard the conversation between Harris and Hall on his radio as he was descending the southeast ridge with Yasuku number, just above the balcony. He tried to call Hall to correct the misinformation and let him know that there were in fact full oxygen canisters waiting for him at the south summit. But his radio was malfunctioning. He was able to receive most calls, but his outgoing calls could rarely be heard by anyone. Hall remained with Hansen and tried to bring the nearly helpless client down without bottled oxygen. Shortly before 5 p.m., Groom finally managed to get through to Hall and communicate that there was oxygen at the south summit. Around 5 p.m., a moderate storm struck the southwest base of Everest, dropping visibility and wiping out the trail back to Camp 4. Winds were blowing at 75 miles per hour. Snow was coming down so hard that they couldn't see more than a couple of steps ahead, and they had to scream to be heard by someone standing at their side. Temperatures had plummeted and they were disoriented. Several clients got lost and well up the normal descent route. Shortly afterward, Hall radioed for help, saying that Hansen had fallen unconscious but was still alive. At 5:30 p.m., as Lapsing left the south summit, he turned to see Harris, who had been severely weakened, trudging slowly up the summit ridge carrying water and supplemental oxygen to assist Hall and Hansen. At this point, Harris must have finally understood that at least 2 of the oxygen canisters stashed there were full. Going up to assist Hall and Hansen was an act of extreme heroism that would cost Harris his life. Unsure whether there was oxygen waiting for him, Hall decided that the best course of action was to remain with Hansen and try to bring the nearly helpless client down without bottled oxygen. But when they got to the top of the Hillary Strip, Hall couldn't get Hansen down the 40-foot vertical drop, and their progress ground to a halt. No one is certain what happened to Doug Hansen that night, but it's been conjectured that Hall and Harris managed to get him down the ropes to a point about 50 vertical feet above the south summit, only to have him lose his footing and fall 7,000 feet down the sheer southwest face. His ice axe was later found jammed into the ridge, above the sheer face down which he is speculated to have fallen. Doug Hansen finally achieved his dream of climbing Mount Everest, but at the cost of his life. His story is one of determination, perseverance, and the triumph of the human spirit. Unfortunately, the expedition turned disastrous due to a combination of factors such as poor decision-making, a fierce blizzard, and unexpected delays. Hansen was survived by his daughter Angie Hansen, son Jamie Hansen, sister Diane Hansen, brothers Thomas Hansen and Stephen Hansen, and his father Fabian Hansen. Thank you all so much for watching.